what was your initial reaction when you heard the news of, actually before Maduro's capture, when you first heard the news of the military operation, what was the first thing that came to your mind? Did you immediately know it's a special ops team that was going in to capture Maduro, or were you worried it was a bigger military operation?
I don't want to claim to have had special insight or anything, but pretty quickly it became obvious that this was going to be a special operations effort, because the kind of ships, what they had been doing in the Caribbean, there were a couple of vessels that were out there that were the ideal platforms exactly for this, that special operators used, and to be able to fly helicopters into Venezuela, something like the ships that were out there. So, I mean, it all just kind of made sense. I'll say it like that.
How do you think they were able to fly in those Chinook helicopters and the Vipers into not only the capital city, but into the most fortified area of the capital city with limited resistance? So what happened to all the air defense systems, the billions of dollars that Venezuela spent on Russian air defense systems? How were those jammed? Were they disabled? Was the communication cut off, or was there, do you think, a stand down order?
Honestly, and I'm not being flip, I would say yes, 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 and yes. We know that there were cyber operations that were initiated to turn off power, to do things like that. So that would have been part of it. And of course, all of these operations, you would do everything you could to blind the enemy so that air defense could not shoot back. They couldn't track, they couldn't identify, that sort of thing. So I think it was a combination of cyber, traditional jamming, but I also, I mean, they had such good intelligence that had been built up over the past probably months, but certainly the past several weeks. And given the nature of Venezuela and this government, I would not be surprised to learn that there was, on the inside, that there was help, let's say.
And this is why you said yes to a potentially yes for a stand down order, because some members of the military would have had to help for them to be able to not only fly into the capital city, but know of Maduro's whereabouts and be able to capture him, especially since not only Venezuelan intelligence was protecting, or National Guard was protecting Maduro, but there's multiple reports that Cuban intelligence was also tasked with protecting Maduro. And the Cuban intelligence is essentially purely designed to counter any assassination attempts by the US Special Forces or the CIA. So this is their specialty, is the US. Yet despite Cuban intelligence, despite the National Guard, the operation was a resounding success. What more can you tell us from all the information that we have so far? Just on the operation itself, how was it so successful, especially when you compare to other regime change operations? I was just looking into the 1989 regime change operation in Panama, and capturing Noriega versus capturing Maduro. Noriega's capture was considered a success. Maduro's a whole other level. So I would love to get your expert analysis on how they were able to achieve it, and also what does it say again about not only the air defense systems, the Russian air defense systems, but also US military capabilities that people love to criticize today with what's happening in China and Russia. But I think it's a lot harder to criticize after yesterday.
So there's a lot to unpack there. First of all, the Cuban role, I think we're going to learn a lot more in the coming days. There were probably somewhere around 30,000 Cubans operating in and around Caracas, different roles. But, Cuba's, the regime in Cuba depends on Venezuelan oil. And so the Cubans would have an interest in making sure that things kept going. But I would never assume that they could not be bought off or penetrated or something like that. I mean, of course, I don't know this, but this kind of you've got Cubans, you've got the military, you've got national intelligence services, you've got drug gangs, a lot of different people, a lot of opportunity for corruption, for betrayal throughout that. So that's why I assumed that there was some of that. I don't know yet exactly how much combat actually took place. We know that there were several U.S. Operators that were wounded. One helicopter was hit, but not bad enough to bring it down. And probably around 40 Venezuelan soldiers and civilians were killed, it sounds like. So there was some combat, but not nearly as much as it could have been. And I would attribute that to the way they came in. Now, how did they do this? It really does boil down to training and technology. I mean, the unit that would have done this, this is what they do 24/7 all the time. They practice these kinds of things, whether it's flying over water, flying at night, aerial refueling of helicopters. If you can imagine at night doing that totally blacked out, this is the kind of stuff they practice all the time. And you could also imagine the selection process to become a part of, whether it's the Special Operations Aviation, the Delta. I mean, this is not a movie. These are the kind of women and men that are picked and have a level of training that is so far beyond what regular people like me would have done as an infantry officer. So it really does have a lot to do with training. And then, of course, the technology. So you go back to Noriega to now, the advances in technology of night vision, for example, communications, weapon systems would have advanced significantly in that time. The thing that's most impressive to me about all this, though, is, of course, this is joint, and that's not a bumper sticker. Joint means Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Special Operations, cyber, space-based platforms, all of these things. And you don't just show up and like at a pickup basketball game. I mean, you have to train and practice that. And I imagine they've been rehearsing this thing over and over and over and over for the past several weeks.
Another thing I want to ask you about is we saw the electricity all go off in Caracas during the operation. Is that just? Do you think that could have been a hack into the electricity grid, or that would have been the precision strikes onto the generators?
I think something like that would have been done using cyber to shut down or disrupt power for however long they needed it to be shut down. More likely than a kinetic strike.
And regarding the H-300, the S-300 air defense systems, the Russian air defense system. Venezuela spent about $6 billion on those and the BUKs over decades, and obviously they failed to protect the leader. Is it unfair, though, to criticize the capabilities of these defense systems based on this operation?
I would
or is
say
it maybe the Venezuelans ill-equipped, or not having, a lot of their equipment is just not being maintained and not functional, to be honest. So is it unfair to criticize the capabilities of these equipment?
Well, I think it's going to be a little bit of both. I personally don't know the state of repair and maintenance of all the different systems that they have, but it does take a lot of hard work to keep all of your systems operating. I mean, we have to work very hard to make sure our Patriot systems, for example, are up. You have to do things, but you also have to practice and you have to train. And those are pretty sophisticated air defense systems that they got from the Russians that are capable. I don't know how well trained they were. Certainly, the Venezuelans should not have been surprised. I mean, we have been telegraphing, the United States has been telegraphing for weeks that something was probably coming. And so if anybody was caught by surprise in the air defense command and control and that sort of thing, that's purely really negligence or total incompetence. Now, I would also say, however, that we have watched over the last 15 years or so, a lot of Russian equipment turned out to be not very effective. We saw this in Syria, and certainly they have not been able to protect, the Russians have not been able to protect their own oil and gas infrastructure very well across Russia. So I'm not convinced that the quality of the equipment is all that it is made out to be, although it's good.
Mm. Another thing you've talked about, and you mentioned earlier in this interview as well, is that someone on the inside was probably working with the CIA or the US military. I think that's difficult to dispute. Everyone's been talking about it. I think there's been reports on various media outlets as well. Who do you think it is? And how high up do you think they are? Because there's been talks about the vice president herself, Delcy Rodriguez, potentially working with the US, especially with Marco Rubio, even before the operation, planning maybe being the mole inside the government, giving them all the data on where Maduro's whereabouts are, and maybe giving the stand down orders for some commanders in the military. Do you think that's plausible for someone that senior, who's now the president of the country, to have been the CIA asset, or that's too difficult to achieve?
I'm reluctant to say something's not possible or plausible. That would really be a stretch, though. I mean, she has been a super hardcore for years part of the regime, and to have been recruited and cultivated as an asset somehow, that would really be something. It is. There's no doubt that we had the special operators had very, very good intelligence about Maduro's whereabouts, the building. I mean, if it's true that what I heard, and I'm sure you did, that they showed up with the welding tools that they might need to cut through. I mean, if they knew that, this is probably a picture that's been built up over some time. I have to say, I've been a little surprised that the president and the administration have been so careless talking about or indicating that they had help on the inside. I mean, from a discipline standpoint, you don't talk about that. You should never reveal that. People may assume it, but to for the administration to talk about, well, we had help on the inside somehow, I think that's not wise.
Could create paranoia though within the command structure in the military as well. No one's able to know who to trust. Maybe weakening the regime.
You're right, but I think that's probably true anyway. I mean, you've got a mix of different factions, military, police, interior, drugs, Cubans. So I would imagine there are a lot of what we would call attack surfaces, if you will, potential places where you could divide or get information.
Let's talk about the repercussions this would have, the geopolitical repercussions this will have. First, let's start off with the message it sends to the rest of the world. That attack happened while the Chinese delegation was inside Caracas, hours after they met President Maduro. Not sure if you've seen the footage of them meeting him. Watching that video and just me thinking that hours later he's going to be in US captivity just shows the craziness of the world we live in. But what message does that send to China? Do you think it was intentional on January 3rd, which is the same day as I think that Trump assassinated Soleimani? And I'm not sure about that one. You have to fact check me, but also Noriega's capture was on the same date. The messaging of this in terms of US capabilities, what does that say to Iran and any other rivals to the US? Greenland as well. Trump is talking about Greenland now. I'd love to get your analysis on that.
Okay, so the date was probably more of a result of other events and weather pushing it to the right. I had heard reports, as you probably did, that this was going to happen back around Christmas time. But then the decision was made to make the strikes against ISIS in Nigeria. And so that pushed it to the right. I mean, even the United States does not have unlimited assets to do all the different things. And then there was weather that may have bumped it a day or two as well. So I think the specific date was
more
not based on the Chinese or the anniversary of Noriega, I don't think. Clearly, most nations by now would assume and would recognize that the U.S. has military capabilities like this. They would have seen this over the past several years. Maybe not everybody would have anticipated that this administration would use them like this. That there was probably still some skepticism, like, come on, he's not actually going to do that. And now I think anybody that, well, I have to say, I was dismissive of Greenland. I'm like, come on, this territory of a NATO ally. Why they welcome the U.S. to be there anyway? Now I think everybody's like, oh hell, he's probably serious about it. I do think that the next target is not Greenland, though. I think it's Cuba. I really think that Venezuela, not only is it was it attractive to the president because of oil, but also I think President Trump would love to be the first president who finally liberated Cuba, going all the way back to JFK. Kennedy couldn't do it. Reagan couldn't do it. Obama couldn't do it. And so now he's potentially not only to have the capability, but by taking Maduro out of the picture, and who knows what else has been sorted out. And I am purely speculating here, but it's the kind of thing, it fits the pattern of, this is our hemisphere. We don't want Russians here. We don't want Chinese here. This is ours. At least that's what he said in his national security strategy. And, Venezuela's out of the way, perhaps. That it's the kind of thing that could happen next. But then, you would see Greenland start, when you've got the wife of Stephen Miller posting, this ridiculous Greenland map with an American flag on it. I don't think that's idle pillow talk.
Talking about Cuba, how do you think that would be harder or easier to achieve in comparison to Venezuela?
Well, the Cubans have a pretty significant military, and of course you've got it's an island, so everything would have to come over the water. At least in Venezuela, if necessary, you could have you had Colombia and Brazil, where you had some other options. Maybe Cuba, I don't see that. So the role of Guantanamo Bay, you've got an American enclave there, Gitmo, which would probably be used somehow. I don't think there'd be anything about it that would be easy, though. But it certainly will be attractive, because when you think about American domestic politics being part of the calculation, in my view, Florida, third largest state in the country, third largest number of electoral votes. And there probably are 3 or 4 seats, House seats in the state of Florida that are expected to go Democratic in the upcoming midterm elections. Something like this, I mean, that could change votes in the state of Florida. So I don't think that's outside what's considered by the administration.
Yeah, I think Marco Rubio, I was just going through the news before we spoke, and I wish I saved it, but Marco Rubio was making comments on Cuba already and talking about Cuba being potentially next. And maybe Trump made similar comments as well, just struggling to keep up. On a bigger scale, though, what does that mean for Chinese interests in Venezuela? So China is the biggest oil buyer from Venezuela and has got the significant investments in the region. So Venezuela has been kind of a pillar of Russian and Chinese influence in that hemisphere. And what would that mean for Iran as well? So Iran's facing its own issues with the protests, the economy's in free fall. We've got reports now, the New York Times I was reading before this, talking about how, according to sources within the regime, there's significant worries about these protests, and they're coming up with plans on what to do next if the regime does fall. So it seems that they are panicking. How much of an impact do you think Maduro's capture will have on Iran, will have on China, will have on Russia?
Well, that that probably tells the Ayatollah and President Xi and others that the American president feels very, very confident right now. He clearly is not going to comply with normal legal frameworks inside the United States, and certainly not internationally. So they probably have to be more concerned that he might do certain things that in the past maybe an American president would not have done so brazenly. So that's one thing. For the Chinese, if they lose access to one of their primary sources of oil, obviously they look for something else, whether it's more dependence on Russia, which is not very attractive for them, I don't imagine, or does the United States now have some leverage with the Chinese, perhaps? I think what I've tried to glean from today, listening to Secretary Rubio, President Trump, in terms of how they're going to run Venezuela, it really boils down to they think that they can influence what Venezuela does by controlling where the oil goes. And so that's going to be the leverage that they have. So perhaps that's something that they're thinking about vis-a-vis China.
Yeah, because it's not really a regime change, though, because if it was a regime change, you'd be talking about Maria Machado taking over from Maduro. But Trump has done the complete opposite. He said it would be very tough, as his own words, for her to lead the country. He called her a very nice woman, but he said she doesn't have the support. At the same time, he's spoken positively about, he didn't mention Edmundo Gonzalez, who was recognized last year as the leader of Venezuela. And they're talking about Delcy Rodriguez. But Delcy, the vice president, now the interim president, she's criticizing the US, speaking in support of Maduro. So I'm just trying to understand what the next steps will be for the US. Who takes over in that power vacuum, because it seems the military is still in control, which means it's not a regime change, and whether this is all part of the plan or whether there was no plan and they're trying to figure it out as they go. Because it would be difficult to believe that for such a successful operation that would have taken months to prepare, that they haven't, and obviously looked likely to succeed based on the intelligence that they have, they wouldn't have prepared a next day plan. What happens next?
That's what you would think. Although we have not a very good record in the U.S. of having thought it through all the way. I was a brigade commander in Iraq in 2003, and it was like the first few weeks, like, wow, this is going great. And then, 20 years later, still there. So it's not beyond belief that this administration also would have failed to really think all the way through what happens after Maduro. You are 100% correct that this only Maduro and his wife are gone, so you still got everybody else is still there. The president never used the word democracy during the press conference yesterday. He doesn't give a toss about, who's the democratically elected leader, whether it's Gonzalez or Machado or whoever. What he wants, of course, is somebody that's going to do what he wants. And perhaps, of course, I don't know this, but perhaps there's some theater with Ms. Rodriguez, and that for her own survival, she has to demonstrate that she's tough and she can do this. Because,
exactly. Yeah.
And then they come to some agreement. So maybe that is the scheme, but I surely don't know.
If that is the scheme, that would be pretty impressive. But why capture Maduro? If Maduro, and that's what surprised me initially, Maduro agreed for the US to have access to Venezuelan oil. He's been very open, especially with all the pressure, to welcome US interests in the region and maybe even decouple from China. He owes a lot of money to China. Venezuela's defaulted on their debt to China. So I don't think he'd be too concerned about moving allegiance to the US. But if he's already agreed to that, didn't agree to step down, but agreed to provide the US whatever they need, then what will be the reasoning for having to remove him? What benefits does the US get from this operation versus Maduro playing ball instead of Vice President Rodriguez playing ball?
This is the show. I mean, you got incredible video, and you've got Maduro being let off, with the dark glasses and handcuffs, the perp walk, all of that. This is all the show, both for the president to demonstrate to his supporters, but also to demonstrate to everybody else, I'm not joking around. And so I think there's probably some personal aspect of this, and like Maduro anyway, and he's going to get what he wants without Maduro there. So he gets the benefit of that show, which will be part of the signal to everybody else that we're prepared to do this.
The national security strategy also talked about the Monroe Doctrine. Some didn't take it seriously, others did. But now we're seeing the Monroe or the Donroe Doctrine in action. The US is moving away from trying to end the war in Russia and Ukraine. Mixed signals when it comes to China. A pretty big package, military package, just been approved. But at the same time, when Japan's prime minister was up in arms about Taiwan, saying they'll protect Taiwan, the US were the ones to call her and tell her to ease up, which China appreciated. So a bit mixed signals when it comes to China. But obviously in Latin America, even Greenland, in the hemisphere, in the Western hemisphere, the US is exercising force. Do you think that pattern will continue? Will it continue after Trump's presidency ends? But more importantly, in the next 2 years, what would that mean for the other wars that are ongoing in the Middle East and for Ukraine? Does that mean the US is genuinely serious about ending those wars to continue their focus on Latin America? Or does that signal a more hawkish approach, maybe a more emboldened approach by Trump after the success in Venezuela?
So first of all, I think this administration would absolutely not fight for Taiwan. And I think maybe I don't know if they've communicated that directly to China, but I don't get the impression that Trump would be willing to go to war over Taiwan. He'd probably raise hell about it, but I don't think he's willing to do that. And I think this national security strategy, which is not a great document, but they're certainly following it with emphasis on the Western Hemisphere. I think there's still we're not completely over the edge yet in the United States. We still have midterm elections coming up. This is going to play a big role, I think. The Congress comes back to Washington D.C. tonight or tomorrow, so they've been really weak and quiet for the most part. Let's see how that changes when the Congress is back in town. If they begin to start exerting pressure when you've got members of Congress, including some Republicans, that will be very vocal in the press and in hearings about what's going on. So the president will have to deal with that. And of course, you've got another government shutdown about 3.5 weeks away. So they got to get that done, that they have to address. So there's a lot of factors that are going to affect this. I certainly hope that what the administration is doing now is not going to be the way we are going forward after him.
Is that? But do we live in a new world order, where the sphere of influence approach to geopolitics is the new way of doing things? You've got the US in their hemisphere, you've got Russia and Ukraine, and China, obviously on Taiwan, but also the South China Sea expanding their territory there. What do you make of this new world order today?
Well, certainly that's what Putin always wanted and what Xi wanted, but we never had an American president that seemed to want that. Now we do. So the key will be how long is he able to do what he's doing without being restrained somehow by the Congress or even his own supporters. I think a big chunk of the 77 million Americans who voted for Trump this last time, a lot of them really did vote for him because they believed him when he said, "No more endless wars. I'm going to be the peace president." And it doesn't look that way. So I wonder how strong his support will be internally. And while he may say, "I don't care because, I don't have to run for re-election," all of the Congress that he needs, they do. And you've got people like Rubio who would like to be president, or Vance who would like to be president. So their American domestic politics will impact this somehow, I believe.
And the last topic I want to ask you about, General, is what's happening in Iran. All eyes on Iran today. We talked about it earlier. As I said, the economy is severe inflation. The markets are crumbling. The currency is crumbling. And people are on the streets. Significant defiance, but also as reports that people are not only defying the regime, but calling for the return of the Shah, the return of the monarchy, which is pretty rare for that to happen. Iran has not only been weakened by Israel, has been weakened by the fall of their proxies and allies, proxies in Yemen, Gaza, Lebanon, and allies including Assad, now Venezuela, while Russia is busy with Ukraine. What do you make of the Iranian regime today, and how involved do you think the US will become there again, especially after a potentially emboldened administration after such a successful operation?
Well, there is the danger of hubris. I mean, we are a victim of that ourselves several times, where it's like there's nobody can stop us, and so you overreach. And I think this administration is very capable of that sort of overreach. There's been 2 or 3 other times in the past where I really thought, like, okay, this is finally going to happen. The people of Iran cannot take any more of this. You remember a couple of years ago, the women, I thought, wow, this is really going to be it. And then it gets snuffed out. But it feels different now, given the damage that's been done to the Iranian proxies, Hezbollah, for example, and Hamas. Maybe the regime really is weak. Maybe there are forces at play in there that I would not know about. I don't have a good feeling about the U.S. government being directly involved in there somehow, unless we already know.
Despite Trump's threats that if Iran shoots their protesters, the U.S. will go in and rescue them, do you think these are empty promises?
I don't. Well, what I'm saying is, if you don't know what it's going to look like afterwards, we shouldn't do it. And I don't know that they have a plan for, okay, we've already figured out this particular man or woman is the one who all the Iranian people really want as a leader, and you help. I mean, you're still talking about regime change, and we do not have a good record of that.
General, absolute pleasure to speak to you again. Thank you, sir.
Thanks for the privilege, Mario.